Those who read this letter will be the most successful people today. I will be the one to provide you with knowledge, experience, and wealth. Most importantly, from this point forward, I will help you memorize the lessons of success in the shortest time possible. Share me with your friends so that together, we can become elite and build lasting wealth. Few people notice this detail. We treat money as if it were a branch of physics, a world of cold constants, precise formulas, and predictable outcomes, when in reality, it is a messy, emotional theater of human ego, insecurity, and social comparison. We are not spreadsheets with skin, we are a collection of biological impulses trying to navigate a world that changed faster than our brains could evolve. Imagine a man named Ronald Reed. He was a humble gas station attendant and a janitor in rural Vermont. For decades, he lived a life of quiet invisibility, fixing cars and sweeping floors. Yet, when he died at the age of 92, the world was stunned to discover that this simple man had a net worth of over $8 million. He didn't win the lottery, and he didn't inherit a fortune. He simply saved what he could and invested in blue-chip stocks, letting the silent, invisible power of time do the heavy lifting. Now, contrast him with Richard Fuscon. Fuscon was a titan of the financial world, a Harvard-educated executive at Merrill Lynch who was so successful he retired in his 40s to pursue philanthropy. He was the archetype of the expert, a man who knew every formula and every market trend. Yet, driven by an insatiable need for more, he took on massive debt and illiquid investments just before the 2008 financial crisis. He ended up in bankruptcy court. His mansions sold off to cover his hubris. The janitor left a legacy, the genius left a reg. This isn't a story about stocks, it is a sensational revelation that financial success is not a hard science, but a soft skill. Your behavior, how you react to greed, fear, and boredom, is infinitely more important than how smart you are. The narrative of our relationship with wealth begins with a radical truth: no one is crazy. Every decision made with money makes sense to the person making it in that specific moment. We all come from different generations, different backgrounds, and different economic climates. The person who grew up during the Great Depression views risk through a lens that a child of the 1990s tech boom can never fully comprehend. This is the archetype of the subjective reality. We believe we are making rational choices based on data, but we are actually making reasonable choices based on our own narrow experiences. The psychological lesson here is the law of luck and risk. We are overlookers of the fact that every outcome in life is guided by forces other than individual effort. Luck and risk are siblings, they are both the reality that you are one person in a world of 8 billion. And you cannot control the wind. When we see a successful person, we attribute it to brilliance, ignoring the luck. When we see a failure, we attribute it to stupidity, ignoring the risk. To master the psychology of money, one must develop a sensation of humility, realizing that nothing is as good or as bad as it looks. By acknowledging luck, we stay humble. By acknowledging risk, we stay compassionate toward our own mistakes. The story intensifies as we encounter the most dangerous emotion in the financial lexicon, the never enough syndrome. Imagine the archetype of the insatiable king. A man who has already won the game but continues to play because he cannot stop comparing his kingdom to the one next door. This is the story of Rajat Gupta, a man who rose from an orphan in India to the head of McKinsey and a board member of Goldman Sachs. He had $100 million, a sum that should have granted him absolute freedom. Yet, he wanted to be a billionaire. He wanted the prestige of the elite, and so he committed insider trading, risking everything he had and needed for something he didn't have and didn't need. This is the sensational tragedy of social comparison. The ceiling of comparison is so high that no one can ever reach it. The only way to win is to stop playing the game of more. The lesson learned is the power of enough. If you do not have a functional stop button, you will eventually crash into a wall. Wealth is not just about accumulation, it is about the protection of what you have from the volatility of your own ego. As the narrative flows into the mechanics of growth, we find the most powerful force in the universe, compounding. Most fail not because of their lack of intelligence, but because they cannot wait for the curve to turn upward. Consider Warren Buffett. The sensational truth about his $80 billion fortune is that over $75 billion of it came after his 65th birthday. He is not just a great investor, he is a durable investor. He started at age 10 and never stopped. This is the archetype of the patient alchemist. Compounding is like a massive oak tree, you cannot see it grow day by day. But if you leave it alone for a century, it becomes an unstoppable force. The psychological challenge is that compounding is not intuitive. Our brains think linearly, but wealth grows exponentially. The lesson is the law of endurance. Success in money is not about making the best returns in a single year, it is about making good returns that you can stick with for the longest period of time. Time is the multiplier, but you can only harness it if you survive the downturns without panicking. The journey then moves into the sanctuary of freedom. We often think of money as a tool to buy things, cars, houses, and status symbols, but the sensational reality is that the greatest value of money is time. Money gives you the ability to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want. This is the archetype of the autonomous soul. Research shows that the highest predictor of human happiness is not wealth or status, but a sense of agency over one's life. When we lose control of our time, we become the wretched worker. Even if we are highly paid, money is the universal solvent for the constraints of the world. The psychological lesson is that wealth is what you don't see. It is the cars not purchased, the jewelry not worn, and the luxury not flaunted. Wealth is the option value of your bank account. It is the ability to quit a job you hate or wait for the right opportunity without desperation. To be truly wealthy is to be quietly free. While being rich is often just a sensational display of current income spent, as the seeker moves through the world of rich displays, they encounter the man in the car paradox. You see a man driving a Ferrari and you think, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool. But the sensational irony is that no one is looking at the driver. They are only imagining themselves in the car. This is the archetype of the invisible owner. We use money to buy things to signal to others that we are worthy of respect and admiration. Yet those things are actually a signal that we have spent our wealth. The lesson learned is the dignity of humility. If respect and admiration are your goals, they are much more easily attained through kindness and empathy than through horsepower and diamonds. Wealth is the accumulated restraint of the ego. Every dollar you spend to show people how much money you have is one less dollar you have to actually be wealthy. The narrative intensity builds as we enter the laboratory of the plan. We are taught to be rational, to make decisions based on the highest mathematical probability. But the psychology of money suggests that being rational is often impossible for humans. Instead, we should strive to be reasonable. The archetypal reasonable investor understands that they have a family, they have fears, and they have to sleep at night. A rational plan might tell you to put every penny in the stock market because historically it goes up. But a reasonable plan leaves a room for error. This is the sensation of security. A plan is only good if you can stick to it when the world is on fire. If a rational plan makes you panic and sell at the bottom, it was actually a terrible plan. The lesson is the margin of safety. You must build a bridge that can hold a truck 3 times heavier than the one you plan to drive across it. In finance, this means having cash on hand and a high tolerance for being wrong. The flow now carries us into the mystery of the tail event. Most of what happens in the world of money is driven by a tiny number of events that are outside the norm. This is the archetype of the outlier. In a venture capital portfolio, or the career of a great artist, or the performance of the stock market, a handful of tail events account for the vast majority of the success. The sensational reality is that you can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune. The key is to stay in the game long enough for the tails to hit. This analyzes the power of survival. If you are wiped out by a single mistake, you never get to see the miracle of the outlier. The lesson is pessimism in the short term, optimism in the long term. You must be paranoid enough to survive the day-to-day volatility, but optimistic enough to believe that the world will be better in 10 years. Survival is the only thing that matters, because it is the price of admission for the big wins. The descent into the hall of volatility reveals a sensational truth that few ever master. The price of a successful investment is not measured in dollars, but in the internal friction of the soul. We are overlooking the most important thing. Market returns are not a fee you pay, but a fine you must endure if you treat them with the wrong mindset. Imagine the archetype of the frightened passenger on a ship tossing in a violent storm. To the rational mind, the ship is built to withstand the waves. But to the emotional heart, every dip feels like the end of the world. Most people view a market crash as a signal that they have done something wrong. But the sensational reality is that volatility is simply the price of admission for long-term wealth. It is the admission fee for the only ride on earth that consistently pays you to stay on it. The psychological lesson here is the acceptance of uncertainty. You cannot have the gains of the stock market without a gut-wrenching feeling of the losses. To grow rich, one must stop looking at their portfolio as a scoreboard and start looking at it as an emotional endurance test. The narrative shifts to the mirage of the forecaster. In a world desperate for certainty, the archetypal prophet of Wall Street tries to tell us exactly what will happen next. We crave these predictions because they soothe our fear of the unknown. But the sensational truth is that the world is governed by black swans events like wars, pandemics, or technological collapses that no one saw coming and that change everything. The analysis of this stage reveals the folly of precision. The more precise a financial forecast is, the more likely it is to be wrong. The seeker of true wealth learns to ignore the noise of the news and focuses instead on robustness. This means building a financial life that doesn't rely on being right about the future, but on being able to survive no matter what the future brings. The lesson learned is the power of resilience. A plan that only works if the world stays the same is not a plan, it is a prayer. A true plan is built on the margin of safety. The understanding that the most important part of every plan is planning on the plan not going according to plan. As the seeker moves deeper into the forest of change, they encounter the end of history illusion. This is the psychological quirk where we believe that while we have changed significantly in the past, we will not change much in the future. The archetypal static self makes long-term financial plans based on who they are at age 25. Only to find themselves a different person at age 50. The sensational reality is that your goals, your desires, and your risk tolerance will evolve. This makes long-term investing an even greater challenge of the soft skill. The psychological lesson is the grace of flexibility. You must avoid the sunk cost fallacy, the urge to stick with a bad investment or a career path just because you have already spent so much time on it. To master the psychology of money, one must be willing to kill their darlings and pivot when their internal landscape shifts. Wealth is not a destination you reach and stay at, it is a moving target that requires you to stay in sync with your own changing soul. The story intensifies as we explore the seduction of pessimism. In the world of finance, pessimism sounds smarter and more plausible than optimism. If a man tells you a crash is coming, we label him a sage. If a man tells you things will get better, we label him a dreamer. The sensational reason for this is that evolution has wired our brains to prioritize threats over opportunities for survival. But the psychology of money reminds us that while pessimism wins the headline, optimism wins the fortune. The archetypal rational optimist isn't someone who thinks everything is perfect, but someone who knows that the world is a constant stream of problems that humans are incredibly good at solving. The lesson learned is the arithmetic of progress. Progress happens too slowly to notice, while setbacks happen too quickly to ignore. To grow rich, you must cultivate the quiet discipline to look past the sensationalism of the daily disaster and trust in the slow, grinding machinery of human ingenuity and compounding. The flow now carries us into the trap of the expert. We often assume that the more complex a financial strategy is, the more effective it must be. We look for the alchemical formula that involves high-frequency trading, complex derivatives, and secret algorithms. But the sensational truth of the psychology of money is that simple outperforms complex nearly every time. The archetypal sophisticated fool loses their shirt trying to outsmart the market, while the simple saver grows wealthy by doing nothing more than being consistent. The psychological depth of this stage is the ego of intelligence. Smart people often feel that simple is beneath them. But in money, simple is the ultimate sophistication because it is the only thing that is sustainable. The lesson is that consistency beats intensity. You don't need to be a genius, you just need to be the person who doesn't do anything stupid for a very long time. This leads to the sensational concept of the three sides of risk. There is the risk you take, the risk you see, and the risk you cannot imagine. The archetypal overconfident gambler focuses only on the first two, believing they have mapped the territory. But the third side, the unimagined risk, is the one that actually ruins lives. This is the story of the Great Depression or the sudden health crisis. The analysis here focuses on the necessity of cash. Cash is not just an asset, it is oxygen for the soul. It is the only thing that protects you against the risk you cannot see. The psychological lesson is that wealth is the gap between your ego and your income. If you can keep your ego small, your savings will grow naturally. And those savings become the shield that allows you to survive the tail events of history. To be wealthy is to have a buffer between you and the world. A sensation of peace that no luxury car can ever provide. The narrative intensity builds as we enter the mirror of comparison. We return to the sensational realization that most of our financial misery comes from looking at the neighbor. The archetypal copycat buys a house they can't afford because they see a peer doing the same, not realizing that the peer is drowning in debt. We are overlookers of the fact that everyone is playing a different game. A day trader has a different goal than a long-term retiree. A billionaire has a different risk profile than a teacher. The psychological lesson is the duty of personal definition. You must define what winning looks like for you, independent of the scoreboard of society. If you play someone else's game, you will eventually lose your own. The story of money is ultimately the story of self-knowledge, knowing what makes you happy, what makes you sleep at night, and what you are willing to sacrifice for the sensation of enough. The narrative reaches its final, absolute peak in the sanctuary of the sovereign mind, where the physical accumulation of property and gold is revealed to be merely the outward manifestation of an internal, psychological revolution. We are overlooking the most important thing. The rat race is not a trap set by the government or the banks, but a prison of the mind, maintained by the bars of a traditional education that teaches us how to be productive sheep rather than sovereign lions. As Robert reflects on the divergent paths of his high HR, the sensational reality of their legacies becomes a mirror for the reader. The poor dad, even in his high-standing brilliance, was a financial slave because his sense of security was anchored in a paycheck he did not control. The rich dad was a free man because his security was anchored in his ability to tear our value out of the ether of opportunity. This is the archetype of the self-actualized capitalist. The individual who realizes that the greatest risk is not in taking a chance, but in playing it so safe that life passes you by without you ever having truly lived. And lies the ultimate meaning that the book intends to convey. Rich Dad Poor Dad is a call to financial individuation. Kiyosaki's core message is that the path to freedom requires a total death of the employee ego. You must stop seeking job security, which is a sensational illusion, and start seeking financial sovereignty. The book serves as a psychological map to the exit of the rat race, teaching that the asset column is the only true source of power in a capitalist world. It posits that wealth is a language, and if you do not speak it, you will always be a foreigner in your own life, subject to the whims of those who do. The lesson is one of internal responsibility. You cannot blame the economy, the Ongchu, or the government for your lean purse. You must become the alchemist of your own balance sheet, turning your time into assets and your assets into freedom. The climax of this journey leads to a state of existential liberty. The seeker moves from the E and S quadrants, where they are the engine of their own income, to the B and I quadrants. Neumark systems and the money do the heavy lifting. This is the sensational return to humanity. When you no longer have to work for money, you are finally free to work for purpose. You can be a better Fuhoin, a more engaged Kongdan, and a more creative soul because the fear of survival has been extinguished. The final revelation is that the rich dad was not teaching Robert how to be greedy, he was teaching him how to be generous with his life. You cannot give what you do not have, and by achieving financial independence, you gain the ultimate gift, the power to choose your own path without a price tag attached. The journey ends not with a bank balance, but with a mindset that is immune to the fluctuations of the market. You realize that you can lose all your gold, but as long as you keep the rich dad perspective, you can build it all back again. faster and stronger than before. The ancient struggle between the two fathers is resolved within you. Bantun Trong the poor dad by using the Gyaduk he valued to read the world. But you follow the rich dad by using that reading to own the world. You are the kind Truksu of your own sanctuary. And the bricks of that sanctuary are the assets you choose to build today. Your mind is your greatest asset. Or your greatest liability, high CHON, which one you want to doubt you in every single day.